Hello, welcome once again to Leto's Law. I'm Steve Leto. I've had several people ask me about the census. If the census contacts you, do you have to answer their questions? And it's an interesting question. It comes up about once every 10 years or so. Only had this video channel for 5, so I guess I've never addressed it before. But the census is actually addressed in the Constitution. And the Constitution actually says that the government has the right to, every 10 years, do a head count and find out where people are located. And in case you don't know this, the census primary thing it does that affects you on a daily basis is that it figures out where the population is located amongst the 50 states. And then things like representation in the House of Representatives is dictated by how many people are in a given state. So if one state gains population, one state loses population, you might see the number of representatives in Washington change. So it's a very, very important thing. So most people would tell you that you want to be counted unless you really don't want your state having its say in DC. But, you know, I understand people might have their own reasons for not wanting to have people intrude and ask them questions. But here's the thing. Apparently, the law on the books says you must answer questions of the census. But the question is, what will happen to you if you don't? Because it turns out they haven't prosecuted anybody for this in years. So I'll tell you right now, I did a bunch of research on this, and I always, if I find somebody who gives a good, clear answer, I will use their answer and I'll credit them. And I'll let you know that I double-checked some of this to make sure that they're not just making stuff up. But PolitiFact is one of the organizations that rates statements made in the news, whether they're accurate or not. And they were asked the question a couple years ago specifically about, do you have to answer questions of the census? And so there's a couple other things that they addressed here. But the headline, and this is written by W. Gardner Selby, published in 2014, but Americans must answer U.S. Census Bureau survey by law, though agency hasn't prosecuted anybody since 1970. So if you just read what you get from the census people, it's going to say, question, do I have to answer the questions? And the answer they give you is yes. Your response to this survey is required by law. And then they cite you to Title 13 U.S. Code sections 141 and 193. And then, of course, there's Title 18, which also talks about a penalty for not responding. Now, they did go look up a few things, including sections 221 of Title 13, which says that any adult refusing to answer a bureau survey shall be fined. Shall be fined. But the section refers to the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, who oversees the bureau, and says, A, whoever, being over 18 years of age, refuses or willfully neglects, when requested, or by any other authorized officer or employee of the Department of Commerce, and so on and so forth, to answer to the best of his knowledge any of the questions on any schedule submitted to him in connection with any census or survey provided for by subchapters 1, 2, 4, and 5 of Chapter 5 of this title, applying to himself or to the family to which he belongs or is related, or to the farm or farms of which he or his family is the occupant, shall be fined not more than $100. But that's not all of it. The fine for refusing to answer a bureau survey can be as much as $5,000. And that's from Title 18, Section 3571. And again, I know this is confusing, and federal law can be that way. But the point is that there technically is a law on the books that says if you do not answer, or you answer wrong, or you give them misleading information on purpose, you can be fined. Individuals willfully giving false answers to the government face a fine of up to $500, which is Section 121. But it also states that no person shall be compelled to disclose information related to his religious beliefs or to membership in a religious body. So there are things they're not allowed to ask. Now, they then went to look to see, hey, has anybody ever been prosecuted for this, and if so, when? So there was an article in the Orange County of California Register, which quoted a Bureau spokesperson, Jennifer Smits, saying that nobody had been fined for failing to participate to date. By telephone, Bureau spokeswoman Stacy Gimbel Vidal told PolitiFact that does remain so. No fines have been levied. The Bureau, she said, is really not in the business of prosecuting people who don't comply. On July 18th, 2012, Andrew Reamer, a research professor at George Washington University, told a U.S. Senate subcommittee that the Bureau had not prosecuted someone for not responding to a survey since 1960. But Bureau spokesman Brian Lavin told PolitiFact by email that no one has ever been prosecuted for failing to respond to a survey since the 1970 census, implying that somebody had been prosecuted shortly before. Now, Reamer testified why the potential fine had escalated from the $100 set in 1929. He said the figure was superseded in the 1980s by a comprehensive law stipulating a fine of up to $5,000 for any criminal misdemeanor or infraction. So in 2012, Vidal told PolitiFact that less than 8,000, well, I guess it'd be fewer than 8,000, of the nation's ACS recipients refused to respond. The survey had a 97% response rate, and it has had a 97 to 98% response rate since being fully implemented. And the ACS is actually a reference to the American Community Survey, which is sent up prior to the census, but it's all tied together, I guess. Because you care about your community, please fill out the form, Vidal said. It has so many positive ramifications related to spending and planning. In a follow-up email, responding to the American Community Survey is about helping national, state, and local officials make informed decisions with timely and accurate data. Just as people are required to respond to jury duty, get a driver's license in order to drive, pay their taxes and report their income, they also have the obligation to respond to the decennial census surveys. Decennial, of course, is every decade. Most Americans asked to participate understand this responsibility and what's at stake for their communities, quality, current statistics that drive decision-making on investments and services in their communities, she said. Retailers, home builders, police departments, and town and city planners are among the many private and public sector decision-makers who count on these annual results to plan services and policies, from building roads and power plants to attracting jobs and planning emergency evacuations. These statistics also help determine how more than $400 billion of federal funding are spent on infrastructure and services, from highways to schools to hospitals. Vidal wrote, the survey is the only source of local statistics for most of the 40 topics it covers, such as employment, language spoken at home, education, and selected housing costs. So they have studied the idea of making responses voluntary. The New York Times noted in a news analysis that the Republican majority House had voted to kill the ACS, though the Democrat-led Senate wasn't expected to agree. That was in 2012. Separately, the story said that if the survey were made voluntary, according to experts, the census would have to spend significantly more on follow-up phone calls and in-person visits to get enough households to answer. And remember, statistics people will tell you, statisticians will tell you, that if they simply get a sample of something, they can often extrapolate the results. But of course, the problem is that trying to extrapolate the results on smaller and smaller samples every 10 years would probably not be as accurate as getting a 97 to 98% return rate, which is what they get now, or at least they got at the time of this story. There was a web link to a 2011 Bureau report stating that when the agency tested making the survey voluntary, the mail cooperation rate dropped by more than 20 percentage points. And if the survey was made voluntary, maintaining its reliability would drive up costs by at least 38%. And the last thing we want to do is drive up the cost of the government. Okay, they already overspend. We don't want to encourage them to spend more. Perhaps of greatest concern, the use of voluntary collection methods had a negative impact on traditionally low response rate areas that will compromise our ability to produce reliable data for those areas and for small population groups. And then it goes on and on. So here's the deal. Do you have to respond to the census? By law, yes. Is the law enforced? Apparently not. Should you respond to the census? I would say you should. But that's a choice only you can make. So, there are a lot of things that people do out there that they ought to do, but don't. There's a lot of things that people do out there that are illegal, but they do them anyways. So the point is that it looks like nobody's been prosecuted for 35, 40 years or so for not filling out the census. But like I said, you're helping yourself because you're getting counted. They're counting you. Do you want to count? What about me? Moving pictures. One of the things that most people will talk about at the most basic level of humanity is the idea that you count, that you matter, okay? And so if you want to be counted and you want to matter, answer the census, okay? But legally, do you have to? Well, according to the books, yeah. Will you be prosecuted? If you don't, probably not. So there you have it. I hope that answers the question for you, and we'll readdress this in 10 years. questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later.